U.S. Supreme Court is letting President Trump pursue the deportations of a Venezuelan migrant under a rarely invoked wartime law, but only after judicial review. All 9 justices concluded that Venezuelan migrants filed their challenge to the Alien Enemies Act in the wrong jurisdiction, and also acknowledged potential deportees must get due process. They continued that the migrants should have filed their cases in Texas, where they were being detained before the deportation flights, rather than in Washington.
David French, that really does play right into your latest column for the New York Times, and it's titled, "Don't Roll Your Eyes at Due Process," talking about this Venezuelan migrants who were deported last month to a prison in El Salvador. And you write in part, all of the deportees are now suffering in prison conditions that if they were found stateside would violate the 8th Amendment of the Constitution. The defense of civil liberties is hard, even under the best of circumstances. Thousands of years of human history tell us that we are not naturally inclined to protect the rights of our opponents, much less the rights of people we believe to be violent and dangerous. That's why the defense of the Bill of Rights requires both practical and moral arguments. The practical defense is often the most effective. Protect the rights of others that you would like to exercise yourself. After all, one day you might not be in control. So David, I'm curious what your takeaway was from the Supreme Court ruling, because I will just say, as is often the case, I read the headlines in newspapers and hear what people are saying on TV, and it doesn't bear any resemblance to what actually happened. I think the takeaway from the ruling last night was that all 9 justices say that people who are going to be deported have to be, 1, put on notice, and 2, have their day in court. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was very strange to me to see the administration out there trumpeting this as some giant win, when in reality they had been saying for day after day after day, due process is no due process for illegal aliens, no due process, no due process. Meanwhile, in court, their lawyers were quietly acknowledging, yeah, we probably have to provide some due process. And then 9 justices say you have to provide due process. And even more than that, they also said, look, these proceedings you'll be able to challenge whether the Alien Enemies Act was even properly invoked. So it was very strange for me to see the administration trumpeting this as some big win when the justices were saying that people get hearings, they get due process, they get notice, and they're going to have an opportunity to challenge the application of the act itself. So this was not a blank check for the administration by any stretch of the imagination at all. Exactly. It was exactly the opposite of that.
So, David, I think that's a really good point and smart reading of this, which we've been trying to hammer this morning. But let's go big picture here. There still seems to be some rhetoric, at the very least, for the administration about defying court orders, about taunting, about this alleged victory. And, potentially we heard from President Trump over the weekend suggesting that, well, maybe we'd even send American citizens who are locked up down to El Salvador, take them up on their offer to house our prisoners. So let's take a step back. Give us your thoughts about what may still be coming, which is this bigger collision over the rule of law.
Well, I think all of that rhetoric was an indication that this was not going to be the case that was going to be the collision. They're trumpeting it as a victory and not really contesting the actual outcome itself. So that's an indication to me that this is sort of the way Trump backs down, declaring what is a defeat, a victory, and then we'll see about compliance. But the indication is they are not choosing this for that ultimate confrontation. We already see challenges to tariffs working up in the courts. We'll see how that goes, because, both immigration and tariffs have been things that Trump has been talking about for decades. They're the few areas of consistency with him. And so what we might see is in those core areas, will he comply in those core areas? That's what I'm so curious about.
So David, let's talk about the second part of the issue, because there is no doubt that while the White House may be trumpeting these decisions as wins, their attorneys are clearly going back saying, hey, if we challenge this head on, we're going to lose 9-0. So from now on, any deportations, we have now been put on notice by all all 9 justices. I mean, this reminds me of the 8-0 vote against Nixon back in '74. All 9 justices are saying you have to provide notice, you have to provide due process. So the court is very clear on what has to happen moving forward. Talk about the stay that Chief Justice Roberts gave, which again, in the other case about getting the gentleman, the migrant who was improperly deported to El Salvador, and of course, as we've been saying this morning, as Lisa Rubin said earlier, a stay is actually a reasonable, rational thing to do when you have an 11:59 p.m. deadline. Right. You have a stay, so the court has 2, 3, 4 days to really think about all the legal issues here. This is a trickier question. So what does the Supreme Court do? What can the Supreme Court do in their rulings on requiring the United States to figure out a way to get that gentleman back, as well as others who have been now, we find, deported improperly?
I find it difficult to believe that the Supreme Court will say of the people who've already been deported, oh, well, our bad. Right. They should have gotten due process. They didn't. Too bad. I could imagine that what you will see is the Supreme Court ordering the Trump administration to do all that is feasible for it to facilitate the return. So the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction over the government of El Salvador. It has jurisdiction over the United States government. And the idea that the United States government now has no influence and no say over what's happening in El Salvador here is just absurd. It's utterly absurd. And so I do not think you're going to see the Supreme Court abandon those folks who are in El Salvador who are not given due process on the grounds of, oh, too late. I just don't know what kind of relief we'll see the Supreme Court fashion. Now, I could be totally shocked and the Supreme Court surprise us all in that regard, but it would be a shock. It would be a deep surprise. And so I think in a few days we might see the administration starting to change its tune about this big victory if now the people already in El Salvador are going to have an opportunity to contest their confinement.
Well, and again, a 9-0 victory. I mean, a 9-0 defeat. You just can't spin that as a victory. I wanted to ask you one more thing. I keep needing to get to John Lemire, but I keep having these questions that come up because what happened yesterday is so fascinating. Again, for people that woke up and read the headlines on major news sites, they've been given the completely wrong impression on what the court actually ruled. So that's one of the reasons why we're underlining this so much. But I read a fascinating article about Judge, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce his name? Boasang, the district court judge. Boasberg in D.C.
Boasberg. Yes.
Read a fascinating article about him that the White House also may be picking on the wrong guy. I don't know if you read the article. This guy was roommates with Justice Kavanaugh. He has been seen as just an absolute bulwark against extremism on both sides in D.C. I won't say a legend among legal circles, among conservative Washington attorneys and jurists, but he's had a real feeder system to some of the best conservative justices in all of D.C. So when we hear that he's this radical left winger, that certainly has to make even the conservative justices on the Supreme Court roll their eyes and go, give me a break. And again, I just want our viewers to know this guy that the administration loathes right now is like a conservative legend inside of Washington, D.C. legal circles, including on the Supreme Court.
Well, he's a very, very, very respected judge. There's no question about it. And I'd also say, Joe, as a general rule, when you know federal judges, as a general rule, they are not the types to be easily intimidated. If you look at the 9 Supreme Court justices, these are not the types of people who are easily intimidated. Your median federal appellate judge, not easily intimidated. And so I think you'll see in the judicial branch, and you've already seen in the judicial branch, a lot more of a firm response to the Trump administration than you've seen really anywhere else, certainly more so than in Congress. And part of this is these judges are independent almost by disposition and nature. And unlike Congress, where when pressure is put on them, Congress is yielding every time, there's just no similar track record of these judges and justices yielding when pressure is put on them. So I'm not surprised at all that all 9 justices here said the obviously correct thing, that due process is a right here. So I think people should be encouraged. The judiciary is far more independent and strong than what they see out of Congress. Now, the big question is going to be, will there be that ultimate collision between the president and the judiciary? But I have confidence the judiciary is going to do its job.
An important conversation there. New York Times opinion columnist David French. David, thank you as always. His latest piece is available to read online now. Just on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about